out. Great. In the interest of time, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good day to you. Hello. And thank you all for joining us for the first session of this new collaborative dialogue series on family planning and the universal health coverage agenda. It's fantastic. I see the numbers are still going up. It's fantastic to see so many of you joining from wherever you are in the world today. For this discussion on shaping policy, programming, and research on family planning and universal health coverage. My name is Amy Baldusser-Bush, and I have the pleasure of serving as your moderator and giving some introductory comments today. It's this morning where I am, close to New York City. I'm a senior director and practice area lead for health policy, advocacy, and engagement at Management Sciences for Health. And I also oversee the Secretariat of the Civil Society Engagement Mechanism for UHC 2030, which is the global multi-stakeholder partnership building stronger health systems for universal health coverage. The CSEM, as we call it, and our more than 800 member organizations in 100 countries worldwide advocate to ensure UHC policies are equitable and inclusive and ensure that no one's left behind on the road to UHC. And we're delighted to be a part of this conversation today. We have a fantastic panel and event coming up, and we look forward to the engagement of all of you. Before we begin, a few logistical reminders. Next slide, please. The webinar is being recorded, and we're pleased to be offering simultaneous interpretation in English and French. There may be a slight delay on the French line, but the interpretation should begin soon. We also have closed captioning available. All participants can select their preferred language by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. When you do so, as soon as that pops up, you'll see the option to choose the English and French channels, to mute the original audio if it's distracting you. Everyone does need to select a language to ensure that you're able to listen to our speakers. If you're having any technical difficulties, please connect with my colleagues in the chat box. In addition, you can also select whether you'd like to see the captions on today's webinar. You should be seeing them automatically, but if not, you can select by clicking the icon with the two C's at the bottom of the screen. You can also use that same option to hide the subtitles. Please note that the Zoom captions are automatically generated, and so sometimes there may be some slight errors. On the Zoom platform, captions are only available in English at this time. Next slide, please. Thanks for introducing yourselves in the chat. It's fantastic to see where you're from. My colleagues will be launching a Zoom poll. We wanted to have a little bit of interaction with all of you and have a sense of how much you've been engaged so far in the work around family planning and universal health coverage. Please take a moment to register your vote, and my colleagues at Knowledge Success will be sharing the results of the poll with us shortly. While we're entering our poll answers, I think we can keep going. Next slide, please. I'd like to thank our partners and co-hosts for this series, Family Planning FP 2030, PAI and Knowledge Success, as well as our speakers, who I'll be introducing to you very shortly. As I mentioned, today is part one of this new dialogue series. We do hope you'll join us for the future sessions focused on policy implementation and leaving no one behind. The times and dates are here on the screen, but at the end of the webinar, we'll make sure to give you a reminder. The timing of this series is also important, providing this opportunity to start bringing together the family planning community in these discussions as we prepare for the upcoming International Conference on Family Planning in November of this year. The theme of that conference, as many of you know, will be universal health coverage and family planning, and ahead of the second UN high-level meeting on universal health coverage in September 2023. Next slide. The agenda for today, after these After this brief overview, I'll share a little bit of information about the high-level meeting and how all of you as advocates, governments, donors, researchers, and other stakeholders can engage. And then we'll move into the dialogue with our panelists. We'll be sure to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. And then we're fortunate to have closing comments today from Dr. Dubé, the Executive Director of FP 2030. It's great to see on the poll that many of you have some background in the topics we're talking about. It should make for a great conversation. So the objectives of today's session are on your screen. We're going to talk, of course, about these linkages between universal health coverage and family planning. Take a look at how we can build momentum between global commitments and national policy making in this space, and also hear about the role of civil society in shaping policymaking and doing accountability work related to commitments for universal health coverage and family planning. Again, if you have any challenges with the interpretation, there are some directions going into the Zoom chat for you. Please let my colleagues know if you're having any difficulty accessing that channel. So before we get started with the conversation, I've been asked to give just a little bit of background on the universal health coverage topic and space. Many of you indicated in the poll that you have some good understanding already about work at the intersections of UHC and family planning. As you know, really at the heart of UHC is the idea that all people can access the quality health services they need when and where they need them without financial hardship. We know that many family planning policymakers and advocates have been working for some time to ensure that a full range of contraceptive services are made accessible to all people, including the poor, young people, anyone who needs them within the context of UHC. But we also see continued high rates of unmet need for family planning means that that promise isn't necessarily being achieved. And we know that the promise of leaving no one behind can't really become a reality without ensuring equitable access to quality family planning services for all who need them. We also know that many of the barriers to achieving access to family planning and to universal health coverage are the same: entrenched gender norms, weak health systems, and growing out-of-pocket expenditures. As our colleagues at Knowledge Success recently said so well, quote, "Countries that understand that UHC is a means of empowerment cannot afford to ignore family planning, which epitomizes choice and need." As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, now is an important time for all stakeholders to work on strengthening policies, both globally and at the country level, that advance universal access to family planning and reproductive health as part of universal health coverage and as part of crucial person-centered primary health care services. As you may know, in September 2019, the first UN high-level meeting on universal health coverage saw world leaders endorsing the most ambitious and comprehensive political declaration on health in history. They made commitments to meet certain targets around achieving universal health coverage, both population coverage and reducing financial burden by 2023. And 2023 is right around the corner. If you haven't been engaged with one of these United Nations high-level meetings, by the way, they're convened by the UN General Assembly and bring together heads of state to address issues of significant importance. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, we're far from reaching many of the targets set at that high-level meeting and off track to meet many of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we also know that resources have been directed away from family planning and reproductive health programs, causing serious disruptions in programs. Today, we're going to talk about the fact that in addition to global commitments, many countries have made national and regional commitments, prioritizing equity in those UHC commitments as well. We've been very pleased to see the increase in the number of FP 2030 commitments that explicitly mention universal health coverage, for example. However, gaps persist between policy, implementation, and results. As we'll discuss today, making progress towards achieving UHC has never been more urgent. Next slide. So 2023 is the midpoint for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And as I mentioned, it's also the sort of target deadline for some of the commitments to universal health coverage that were made in 2019. So the UN General Assembly has decided to host a second UN high-level meeting on UHC. And what you see here on the screen is a provisional timeline of preparations. We at the Civil Society Engagement Mechanism really encourage family planning advocates to engage in this process to help us seize this opportunity of the high-level meeting to get UHC back on track, and also to use it as a moment for inclusive accountability. Member states will be reporting on progress towards the commitments they made on UHC, and those include commitments to achieve the health SDGs, including SDG 3.7 on family planning and reproductive health. Let's look at a couple of opportunities for you to do that. First of all, we encourage you to engage as we work on refining the key asks for the high-level meeting. This process, led by UHC 2030, will be kicking off in the near future. You can join us, you can subscribe to our CSEM newsletter, which will give you opportunities to receive updates on how to participate in that process. My colleagues will include our website in the chat box. Since 2020, an international group of stakeholders have also been monitoring each country's progress towards universal health coverage through something called the State of UHC Commitment Review. This initiative, led by UHC 2030, gives a sort of multi-stakeholder view, so that includes civil society voices on the state of global and country commitments towards UHC. Monitoring that progress is an important part of accountability. Every year, the CSEM organizes country-level consultations, and advocates from across many different health issue areas participate in those consultations, including those working on family planning and reproductive health. This year, we're organizing 20 of those country consultations. We invite you to be a part of them, and there are more details on the website. We also encourage, and we know that many family planning advocates are engaged every year around International Universal Health Coverage Day on December 12th. This will be a great time following on the heels of the International Conference on Family Planning to amplify messages coming out of that meeting and to call for ensuring that access to family planning is reflected in the work around the high-level meeting itself. We've also launched a survey in relation to some of this work, the State of UHC commitment work, which will also be put in the chat box. We encourage your feedback to that survey so that you can influence the data profiles that will be developed for those, the country profiles in the State of UHC report. As before every high-level meeting, there will also be multi-stakeholder hearings and other opportunities at the country level to help shape your country's position and hopefully your head of state's commitment to universal health coverage at the HLM in 2023. In our newsletter, we'll provide you with updates on how to engage and register for those multi-stakeholder hearings. Making progress towards universal health coverage, of course, and satisfying unmet need for family planning are long-term processes. And I'm looking forward to hearing from our distinguished panel today about how efforts to shape policy and mobilize civil society can help us move from these high-level commitments at places like the HLM to reality of implementing universal health coverage that includes expanded access to family planning, quality services without increased financial burden at the country level. So I'm pleased to welcome my panelists for today. Next slide. Please join me in welcoming them. I'll be posing a few questions to the panelists, encouraging them to have a dialogue with each other, and then we'll open up for questions from all of you. Thanks in advance to the speakers for being here today. Our first panelist is Dr. Gifty Adico, the Chief of the Commodity Security Branch in the Technical Division of Unfpa. Dr. Adico provides technical leadership and strategic direction for UNFPA on family planning and reproductive health commodity security. A native of Ghana, Dr. Gifty is a medical doctor with specialization in public health, focusing on reproductive health and family planning in developing countries. We're also pleased to be joined by Edibiye Adeshina, Director of Health Financing and Health System Strengthening at PAI, where he leads PAI's UHC Engage, Primary Healthcare Initiative, and Government accountability for family planning budgets projects, as well as the organization's broader technical focus on health financing and health system strengthening efforts to improve and expand sexual and reproductive health and rights policies, programs, and services. BE has over 20 years of experience, including with the World Bank and Avenir Health, in an array of technical areas, including strategic planning, civil society engagement, translation of data, evidence, and insights for policy and donor decision-making. And we're also pleased to be joined by Poonam Mutreja. She's the Executive Director of the Population Foundation of India, based in New Delhi. The organization is a leading think tank that works towards the implementation of gender-sensitive population policies, sexual and reproductive health, and development strategies. She has more than 40 years of experience in development and has set up and led several NGOs contributing to policy and advocacy work. Welcome to all the panelists. Please bring them onto the screen. I'll give you a virtual round of applause since you can't hear from all of the members in the audience. While we have the dialogue today, we also encourage all of you to begin to drop your questions for the panelists into the chat. Great. I see B, Poonam, and there's Dr. Gifty. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Good day. Thank you again for being here. We're going to start with a question for you, Adibi, kicking it off and helping us to think about the role of civil society in these processes. What are 3 of the key lessons learned in your role supporting civil society in shaping policymaking on UHC and family planning at the national and subnational level? I've talked a lot about the global. We're looking forward to hearing about that country level experience. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Amy. And thanks so much I want to thank my colleagues from FD 2030, from Knowledge Success, from MSH for this opportunity to talk about the work that PAI and our partners around the world are doing to expand access and ensure sustainability of family planning through universal health coverage reform. Through generous funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, PAI initiated the UHC Engage project in 2019 and working in concert with our civil society partners in Burkina Faso, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Uganda, and Zambia to make key inroads on this very topic, making family planning a core piece of UHC policy and implementation. The preliminary evidence on successful UHC policy reform strongly suggests that CSO advocacy and accountability are pivotal to the success of the process. If I could pick key lessons from these preliminary results, I would pick these 3. 1, advocacy must be strategic. 2, coalitions are crucial. And 3, action must be grounded in evidence. By strategic advocacy, I mean that our partners are grounding their advocacy strategies in the SMART framework, which SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. This framework guided the process for understanding their respective social, political, and economic contexts, as well as their approach to engaging stakeholders, all while giving themselves enough flexibility to adapt to changing factors. It helped partners to identify and refine the most important near-term advocacy objectives relative to their overall goal, UHC. It allowed partners to map out the UHC decision makers to better understand the policy audience and engage them accordingly. Our partners were able to design approaches that would build common ground in understanding the UHC landscape, from which discussions on the reform process and the final policy outcomes could be determined. So 2nd, coalitions are critical. Our partners sought from the very beginning to build a coalition starting in government agencies who are absolutely fundamental to the process, and then bringing along other key stakeholders, including non-governmental program implementers, the private sector represented by professional and trade groups, as well as other in-country civil society organizations representing key demographics such as youth-led groups. This broad coalition was brought together strategically by introducing them to the UHC concept through learning forums, which took the form of workshops, seminars, or just regular policy meetings. With common understanding of the UHC process as their foundation, our partners then leveraged these forums that later grew into more established bodies, becoming expert advisory groups or technical working groups. The discussions that grew out of these established bodies would later inform key pieces of the final UHC policy proposal. The process signaled to governments the value of CSO representation and support in the decision-making process, and the inclusion of key stakeholders ensured a more robust and inclusive policy outcome. Last but not least, is action must be grounded in evidence. Not only did our partners invest heavily in understanding and distilling key components of the UHC's health financing infrastructure for themselves, they also worked with recognized experts to translate these concepts into accessible formats, such as the workshops and seminars that I mentioned earlier. These formats offered a shared learning experience as well as a medium for transitioning informal policy discussions into more formal policy planning platforms. The inclusion of an evidence-based approach reinforced the credibility of the advocacy strategy and facilitated successful engagement. While these three lessons are essential to the process shaping UHC policy reform, they are just the beginning, and there's so much more to do to make UHC a tangible reality for the average person. I like to use the analogy of a marathon relay race to describe the process for achieving UHC. A committed relay team would be built on people with the ability for speed and endurance. And in that same sense, achieving the goal of UHC will need advocacy to get runners up and going, and as well as accountability to keep runners on track. And who better exemplifies these qualities than CSOs? Thank you, and back to you, Amy.
Thanks, B. And what a terrific, that's the first time I've heard you use that, that analogy. I should stop saying it's a long-term process and start saying it's a marathon. I think we're heading into a year where, some of those team members will be sprinting, and it's great to hear about the strategic approaches, the evidence-informed work, and the partnerships that civil society are building to take that advocacy work forward. We're going to continue on that theme as we hear from Poonam. Thanks for being here, Poonam. A question for you around the gaps that you've seen. What are the gaps and opportunities for integrating family planning in UHC during the design of universal health coverage policies in your country and context? Thank you. There you go. We can hear you now.
Thank you, and it's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here as part of the marathon that many NGOs, CSOs across the world, and especially FP 2020 to begin with, which is now sprinting into 2030. So it's an absolute pleasure having been associated with the reference group earlier and now part of the country engagement group in India, which is very ably led by Unfpa in Delhi. So the gaps in the primary health system where universal health coverage is concerned are not just about coverage. It's about empowerment and choice. Addressing the unmet need for family planning is, as was said, a long-term process, but can be accelerated through the government's efforts to ensure universal health coverage, and of course, the efforts of all of us working with the government. Improving family planning services and their coverage and the outcome depends on accessibility, availability, capacity of the health workers to deliver quality people-centered care. So strengthening the entire public health system would also, or the health system, including private, would also help achieve goals in terms of family planning. There is one of the big gaps is the lack of understanding of social determinants of health, especially among the political leaders, policymakers, and functionaries, health functionaries and providers. So factors outside the health system, such as gender norms, often have a grave impact on women's health and fertility decisions. This is not often accounted for while designing and implementing the programs. And to address these disparities, health disparities, we need to identify the drivers of ill health and the social determinants of health, especially family planning. For instance, the practice of early marriage in India, Asia, and many other parts of the world also is a driver of early pregnancies, leading to poor health outcomes for both the mother as well as the child. Having information on health outcomes for both is important. Having the experiencing family planning, the experience of family planning inequities, where they are experienced for what reason will help shape policy as well as programs, perspectives, and prioritizing and funding allocations and for the service delivery. Funding allocations is a huge gap I'd like to flag and reiterate. Investing in health education and behavior change, communication to promote self-care, individual and community capacities to take charge of their health is equally imperative. I do believe that investing in expanding choice, especially on long-lasting methods, modern methods, has been one huge gap given the large number of young people and the demographic profile in India, where there's a very large population at a reproductive age. And finally, the unavailability of the data. We must accept we cannot solve a problem if we do not understand it. And I really welcome the State of the UHC Commitment Review 2030, which was shared with us by Amy. And having a robust data management system that supports evidence-based planning for family planning and programming is essential to achieving UHC. Sparsely available data in peri-urban areas, migrants, refugees, and women, adolescents, and other marginalized populations is a huge gap we need to address. Even for addressing social determinants of health, we need proper data on inequalities between population subgroups. Without data, we are simply making shots in the dark. And the SDG goal to leave no one behind is something that we have to ensure that we start focusing much more on the last mile instead of in 2023 or in 2030 saying, oh, we did not reach the last mile. Of course, lack of awareness among communities is another issue about healthy behavior, available services, their entitlements, their responsibilities, the obligations, the male involvement. Family planning is not just a women's issue, it is a men's issue too, and it is a societal issue. And there, the men missing and taking responsibility, I'd like to suggest, is a huge gap, and many of us are quite aware of that. And there are myths and misconceptions around population issues. And despite very robust data in India and significance of voluntary rights-based approach to family planning and population issues, there is a call for coercive population policies in India, which Population Foundation is leading, if I may say, the charge to advocate against and advocate for choice and freedoms and a rights-based approach. Earlier, the Ministry of Health and Family Planning, which is about 6 months ago, made a statement which unequivocally made a statement against forcing people to have the number of children, that the two-child norm and the push for coercive policies that we see in India, it's a very, very big challenge and distracts us away from focusing on universal health coverage. Thank you.
Thank you, Poonam. Thank you. There are so many important points in what you said. I can't even just summarize them into one thing, but I heard the thread of the evidence and the data. We'll get back to that with BE. And I also want to thank you for right up front lifting up the empowerment and choice focus. I think also the broader narrative around health system strengthening, rather than just a vertical program focus, but working across the health system and addressing the health system's gaps, as well as those social determinant challenges, those financing gaps. All of it will be a part of the broader key asks related to UHC in the coming year, and it's very clear how access to family planning is situated within them. I want to continue the thread with Dr. Gifty from Unfpa and ask you to talk about a couple of entry points and practical examples of integrating or creating a dedicated focus on family planning in UHC policy design. I know Unfpa has a passion for the data and evidence-informed advocacy as well. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you for giving us this opportunity to be part of this collaborative dialogue. And hello to all the friends around the globe who are listening to us. At Unfpa, we believe that every girl, no matter her age, background, or location, deserves an equal chance to survive and thrive, and to live a life free from discrimination and violence, and to exercise control over her own body and future. And a critical step to ensuring that we achieve this vision is that all women have access to sexual and reproductive health care, and that this includes voluntary family planning. And when this happens, we know that it positively transforms not only the lives of women and girls, but families, communities, and countries. And it's on this basis that I would like to highlight 3 points. So you mentioned 3 entry points, and I'll give practical examples of these 3 entry points. And this is based on our work with partners and country. So these points are making sure we have the evidence to ensure that family planning is integrated. And I know that we've spoken about data and evidence, and I'll explain this shortly. Making sure that we have the people to deliver the services. And then the third entry point is making sure that the resources are available to do these things. And so what do we mean by data and evidence? And I know Poonam has mentioned this. Resourcing UHC requires knowing what resources we need, where they are needed, for whom and when. And therefore, it's important that we have accurate and disaggregated data if we want to provide universal health coverage. We are at Unfpa, we are prioritizing working with governments and others to collect data to ensure disaggregation and validation for family planning. And we are collaborating with others to analyze what is needed to build sustainable coverage for family planning. And a practical example of this is our work with Avenir Health, where we have developed a family planning opportunity database for evidence-based priority setting and advocacy. And I can explain this during the Q&A. But this database looks at countries and where we think, based on evidence, are the strategic entry points so that interventions can be prioritized and resources can be used for evidence-based programming so that we can efficiently drive progress. And then secondly, we also have a population data portal that can inform sound program design for universal coverage. by providing open access data. This can help, for example, to visualize small area estimates to inform the design of policies and programs that provide equitable coverage for contraceptive services, including for the most left behind population groups and those at risk due to climate change. So these are the two practical examples with data that we can share. And then I talked about the second entry point, which is making sure that we have people to provide services. And that is why building capacity and ensuring tax shifting policies are so important. For instance, we are working in several countries, over 30 plus countries, where we now know that community health workers provide DMPA SC injections. And now 21 countries have approved self-administration of DMPA SC. And so if we can mobilize the scarce human resources that we have and build their capacity to do some of these things, we can ensure equitable access. And we also know that stillbirth attendants, particularly midwives, are a vital health workforce that can offer family planning services. And we have learned this through our Maternal Health Trust Fund. And I'm sure several of you come from countries that benefit from this program. We know that through this Maternal Health Trust Fund, long-acting, we've been working with partners to ensure that over 90 midwifery schools have been trained on long-acting reversible contraception. And family planning, counseling, and service delivery is among the core competencies of midwives. And we are giving added emphasis to postpartum and post-abortion family planning as key entry points. The third entry point is how we pay for it. And we know that whilst publicly financed services are important, UHC can also be financed through a variety of complementary approaches, including insurance, vouchers, and total market approaches. And so integration into national health schemes is crucial. And I don't want to go on too much about this, but a practical example is from Ghana. And I know there's somebody from Ghana online, and it would be good if that person can also share it when we go through the Q&A, where they have successfully integrated family planning commodities into their national health insurance. And this was based on strong advocacy by all partners, right? And also we learned from Ghana during the CPD net side event that national studies have demonstrated that whilst there can be an initial short-term cost increase of including family planning in national health insurance schemes, the benefits are soon reaped through maternal health savings and improved health outcomes for mothers and infants. And so we have the evidence to show to policymakers that it's not too expensive in the long term to include family planning in national health insurance schemes. And whilst we continue to advocate for family planning in national health insurance schemes, we still have other opportunities such as vouchers. And in Uganda, we've used vouchers to map access to family planning, GBV, and maternal health services, and refer those in need of services. And these voucher cards are issued by members of 24 village health teams as part of building capacity with Maristopes Uganda. And these initiatives are targeted at regions where they are particularly very high unmet need for family planning. So I'll pause here now and hear from other colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Gifty, and I really appreciate the focus on the importance of investment in human resources for health, and also the research and the data about the importance of including family planning in the UHC benefit packages, because I think particularly in the COVID context, when we've seen so many redirection of resources as well as overtasked health workforces, and I really want to give a shout out to the midwives as well, it's important to have the data to make the case for those continued investments and to show the longer term impact on that. Bea, I wonder if you wanted to react to any of what Dr. Gifty was saying, particularly on the financing front and how we're sort of making the case for inclusion of family planning, or doing the costing or doing those studies to sort of better understand, so that we can inform our advocacy around the health financing. I know this wasn't a planned question, but I feel like you might have something interesting to say about that.
Certainly. Thanks so much, Amy. And my thanks to my co-panelists for their very informative talks. So on the health financing piece, it is absolutely crucial. UHC isn't possible, or UHC isn't a thing without that core part of it, ensuring that there's a financing mechanism that maintains the sustainability of the services provided through UHC. And particularly for family planning, one of the most cost-effective, most impactful interventions out there, it's absolutely necessary to include that in whatever benefit packages exist. What we found in different countries and what our partners have been identifying is that once they include family planning in UHC, they also have to present the evidence of how much savings it generates, which then it inspires additional funding to go towards that UHC, whatever UHC policy reforms are in place. So in other words, it's a cycle of creating, building that sustainability piece into it. If you show that there's cost effectiveness in it, and the process can show that it has an impact, then it builds more faith in the process and ensures that there's financing. Of course, the financing piece has its own set of complications, which is ensuring that it comes through whatever channel there is. So whether it's taxes, whether it's loans through multilateral agencies, at least to kick it off in the initial stages. These are very important pieces. The health financing piece is really crucial. And what our partners have seen in implementing is that you have to first clarify to everyone what it involves, how that can be implemented, working with government and particularly the Ministry of Health, and in some cases, the Ministries of Budget and Planning. But once the evidence is there, things start to move pretty quickly. And advocacy is going to be a big piece of ensuring that evidence gets heard in the different venues of decision making. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, B. Poonam, I wonder if you wanted to pick up on that as well. You also mentioned funding for behavior change, for community engagement. Any reactions to the previous presentations by your colleagues?
Yes. So I'm glad that we are discussing, and that Dr. Adico also mentioned the issue of finances. And also I appreciate the efforts of Unfpa, as we heard, on making insurance schemes include family planning. So we know that earlier, historically, a lot of dollars fed or money fled from the reproductive health field and family planning into other very important areas. I'm not grudging it, but it did. Let's historically recognize that happened. And post-COVID, it's happened again. And therefore, we have to stay, our lens has to stay on the unmet need as a result of limited resources, especially investments in more research on contraceptives, more male methods. We need, as was said by all of us, long-lasting methods. So we did an analysis in India on how much we spend from the expenditure, because there are no disaggregated data. And we did an analysis, therefore, of the expenditures, and we found that India spends 85% of its budget on sterilization, and only 3.5% of the meager family planning budget. It's really small. No wonder we have a huge unmet need. And that, our analysis and sharing it, as Adibia said, I didn't pronounce your name properly, forgive me, as you said, has led to we have a financial analysis, things fall in place. So that's exactly what happened in India. And what happened is that the recognition that we have a huge unmet need for temporary, long-lasting methods, modern methods, but we were investing very little money. So that has led to some action after 30 years of inaction. So it is very important to keep doing budget analysis and identifying the need. That's when we'll be able to raise the money. That was one point. And Amy, you had a second point. I'm sorry, that you wanted me to comment on.
That's okay. For time, Poonam, I think that was actually a great response to the panel. I want to make sure we have some time to get to these questions that are coming in from the audience. Dr. Gifty, as you may have seen, there is a question about the Unfpa opportunity database. I see your colleagues are dropping things in the chat in terms of links, but I don't know if you want to briefly talk about that or if their links have answered all of the questions.
Just to highlight what has been put in the chat so that participants can understand it. So it's a tool we've developed with Avenue Health. So it's not only for Unfpa. And what we've tried to do is to look at all the data that's the updated data for countries and to see what are the gaps, just as Poonam went through. I kept calling you Poonam, sorry about that. Poonam went through at the beginning. So it's data driven, right? And then countries can now target what are the remaining challenges. And we can share what we have with participants who are interested. Like you can give us an email address, or Ben Light can share his email address and share with you. What is important for us is that countries accept and validate the data, then it's useful, and they use it for priority setting. So it's not for Unfpa. It's supposed to be a global thing that we all do as a community, and not simply because Unfpa is monitoring or targeting programming. Yes, thank you.
Thanks a lot. B, well, I know you previously worked with the partners at Avenue Health, so you may have something to say about that as well. But I wanted to ask you a question that has come in. One of our participants is saying, most of the time the full spectrum of family planning methods are not included in a benefits package of a social health insurance scheme, for example. How can we ensure the inclusion of family planning at the onset? The global FP community seems to be playing catch up on this in many countries. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Amy. And I'll draw from the example of our partners in Ghana, which Dr. Adico mentioned. MSI, PA actually supported MSI's work in generating the evidence. And part of that evidence, part of that evidence wasn't just the financing piece of it. Obviously, it was the impact. And so in showing the impact, they needed to show a broad set of what method availability contributed overall to ensuring access for family planning. It wasn't just focusing on short-term methods or long-term methods. It was showing that the broad set of methods had the most impact in terms of ensuring access, to expanding access and making it affordable. So one of the key things that the evidence, as I mentioned earlier, is that, and this is sort of borne out in the assessment of the work that MSI Ghana did and the work that our partners in Zambia, the Center for Reproductive Health Education, have done, is that it's not just presenting the evidence and showing the impact. There also has to be a combination of advocacy strategies that communicate that evidence and shows, look, you can't building a benefits package that only has a limited set of family planning services or contraceptive methods will not have the intended impact that the full breadth of comprehensive family planning services will have. And so it's sort of like saying, shortchanging yourself by reducing family planning won't really get you far. So definitely including that broad base of information at the early onset stage and including advocacy strategies for communicating why that's important are key to ensuring that the full comprehensive set of family planning services are included in any UHC benefits package. Thank you.
Thanks, very clear and great to have the country examples. I see some colleagues are also putting some country examples of their own experience of UHC benefit package shaping in the chat. Poonam, I want to turn to you for the next question. It really resonates with some of what you were talking about before in terms of last mile, the passion that we share around leaving no one behind. A question about the fact that although family planning is, of course, an essential part of UHC, it's still difficult to reach marginalized communities. There may be lack of people accepting. You were talking about some of the myths, cultural and other gendered barriers to accepting and using FP. Are there any high impact practices to reach family planning, to get family planning, voluntary family planning to these communities? And are we using the right approach to engage those most vulnerable groups, such as people with disabilities, in access to family planning? That's a big question, but I think you have some good experience with it. Over to you. You're still on mute, Poonam. We can't hear you.
One very effective way of reaching people I will use from our government program. There is a program called MPV, which was launched 5 years ago in the 140 most high fertility districts. Now, India is not only going after high fertility districts, but these are the districts, as expected, where all the gender indicators are very poor: low literacy, low agency, lack of access, poor governance. So in these 140 districts, which the recent results of the National Family Health Survey showed that they were very effective. It was a comprehensive approach. I'd like to call it a universal health approach to family planning within the context of these 140 villages. I don't have time to explain the detail, but those who are interested could go to the Government of India's Health and Family Welfare Ministry's website and look at MPV. And I'm very happy to know, after the results came out from the National Family Health Survey of huge success in these very marginalized communities, the country has decided, India's decided to expand it. And the civil society is absolutely supporting, including we are identifying gaps. I am convener of something called the Advocates for Reproductive Choice, which is a coalition of 160 NGOs in India. And as it was said earlier, coalitions are very important for planning. So we are in the process of identifying gaps and sharing with the government, so that when the program goes further, it will be a stronger program when it expands and scales up. Second, I'd like to mention our own work of PFI, where we've had a soap with 182 episodes over 3 seasons on television, where we tried to change behavior and social norms. And family planning was a huge success in that program, as was decreasing gender-based violence, as was greater women's empowerment and so on. But family planning through behavior change and social norms, not only, I'd like to say, our program, Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hu, a woman can achieve anything, but I'd like to share with you that globally, I have seen the evaluations and research of behavior change communication programs in Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, many countries, and starting with Brazil, where fertility rates went down from 3 to 6 after this very effective soap in Brazil, almost more than a decade ago. So I'd like to mention these two. And third, I'd like to mention we have lots of opportunities. G20 summit we have, where India is going to take a lead, FP 2030, ICFP. These are all opportunities and big alliances and big, not just conferences, all through the year. We can work on ensuring that universal healthcare becomes a dream come true.
Thank you, Poonam. Fantastic. A dream come true indeed. And many of us are advocating in those other global spaces. And I think that cross-issue organizing and joint advocacy is so important if we're going to achieve this dream. I wanted to invite another colleague from UNFPA, Howard Friedman, who put some comments in the chat there. There were interest in the UNFPA investment cases. And so I just wanted to invite Howard to speak briefly about that. Then we'll have a little more time for dialogue before we hand over to Dr. Dubé. Howard, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. In terms of the UNFPA investment cases, it's important for us to reflect on our perspective, which is investing in family planning is not only the right thing to do from a human rights perspective, but it also makes good economic sense. And we use that as a way to help have our dialogues with ministers of finance, with donors, with others in that financing community. UNFPA has partnered with different groups, reference groups in countries themselves, involving ministers of health, ministers of finance, other NGOs, local researchers, and experts, including Avenir Health, to develop a set of tools which are available, and you can see it in the chat box, that help identify costs, impacts, and the benefits of scaling up family planning services. These investment cases are a powerful tool in the dialogue, helping countries understand where they can improve, where they can scale up services, and how much money they need, because it links to what is the current financing and identifies the financing gaps. Once again, these are country-owned, validated exercises working with the national governments, and we think it's a very powerful way to engage in the process itself. You can see more information in the chat box. It's at impact40.org. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thanks, Howard, and thanks to UNFPA and all of you. Many folks are sharing tools and links and stories in the chat, so I encourage you to follow it. I can barely keep up. Lots of excitement today for the topic we're addressing. I want to lift up one more issue. I'll sort of put this out to any of you who want to respond to it. We're getting a couple of questions related to supply side investments around and sort of providers, and we also have some specific questions about commodities. I'm not sure we'll have time to get through all of this before Dr. Dubé joins us, but let's give it a shot. So the first question is about, while inclusion in social insurance coverage is important, poor supply side investments can lead to low provider engagement and benefit utilization. Given this, has there been any experience in LMICs in how parallel support was provided in both the demand and supply side to ensure there are sufficient family planning providers who meet minimum quality standards where beneficiaries can access insurance coverage? I think this has been a challenge in achieving UHC and different models in other countries. Who wants to take that first? Howard? And then maybe we'll go to B. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. What a phenomenal question, by the way. As we think about the health system, there are the different components. And UNFPA thinks about it from that WHO model. In the service delivery component, we've been able to work with countries to analyze data to understand the interaction between health facility data, population, and geographic accessibility. And as a result, we were able to work, for example, in Senegal to reduce the number of health facilities needed in a population so as to access within 2 hours. That reduction helps improve the service delivery and the logistics because there are less delivery facilities which really aren't being used. In the health workforce area, there's a strong support for task shifting. UNFPA has a focus on midwifery through our Maternal Health Trust Fund. Midwives are essential for achieving universal health coverage. They can deliver 90% of all essential sexual, reproductive, maternal, and newborn health services. And we see them as a critical role and player in this opportunity. UNFPA, along with global partners, over 300 national partners, have worked to scale up quality midwifery programs. And 2 other items just to mention, in terms of products and delivery, of course, UNFPA has been the largest multilateral supplier of contraceptives and condoms. Through our thematic trust fund, UNFPA supplies, the KMIs we have provided have been estimated to have prevented nearly 90 million unintended pregnancies, 250,000 maternal deaths, 1.6 million child deaths. And lastly, health information systems. We're passionate about our data at UNFPA. We've got a link in the chat and a few for our population data portal, where we have excellent visualizations that help us identify the populations in need, what are the coverage gaps, and planning for how to address them. So each one of those components, we're looking to systematically examine and work through in our process itself. Thank you.
Great job, Howard, because you also answered one of the questions that came up about community health workers and about task shifting. We've certainly seen the importance in our programs at Management Sciences for Health of midwives, providing family planning, particularly increasing access for adolescents. So thank you for lifting that up. Bea or Poonam, do you also want to come in on that, that same question?
Yes, it was very comprehensively dealt with by Howard, but I'd like to add that in India and many parts of Africa, my experience is that there is a supply side failure, which really needs to be fixed. And it is a management failure. It is something that ministries need to get professional help to deal with. Number two, I'd like to say that frontline health workers can play a big role in helping communities decide and access commodities. And there are certain commodities that cost money. And again, I will reiterate that we are hiding behind the lack of funding available, finances available for commodity supplies. It's management failure, it's finance failure, and finally, we absolutely need in those countries, including India and others, we need to ensure that every contraceptive that is available to any woman in the world should be available to all women in the world.
Amen. We're almost at the end of this section. Bea, do you want to make some final comments on that question or other topics that have been lifted up?
Yes, just to add that both Howard and Poonam have covered the key pieces of that. The only thing I'll add here is a more sort of CSO perspective, and I'll draw that from our partners in India, as a matter of fact, who have been Sahyog, who have been working on the accountability piece of UHC, and which is essentially looking at the health system delivery process, as well as the community impact process. So they have been working with communities to identify where gaps in service delivery exist, to identify and working with district health teams to identify where those issues in financing and support for the supply side investments that are necessary need to happen. So they're working in conjunction with both what's happening at the community side, which is the demand side of it all, and to ensure that those needs are met at the very local level, down to the ward level, and ensuring that those gaps are identified and the resources that are needed to provide services are available. So that's a perfect example of where CSOs are able to build the bridges in ensuring that the supply piece, the supply side and the demand side needs are met. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's been fantastic to hear the perspectives of the different participants on how our sort of UN agencies, multilateral partnerships, governments, civil society, each of us has a particular role to play, not only in the overall achievement of universal health coverage, but in bringing this focus, rights-based focus on family planning, lifting up the data and evidence, building those coalitions, ensuring support for the crucial health workforce, and building these messages into the broader broader health system strengthening narrative. I really encourage all of you to take a look at the resources from UNFPA, from WHO, and others that are in the chat. There have also been some requests, Poonam, for links to your TV series and the other work I know you're doing with chatbots and BCC work in countries, so we'll make sure that those are shared. And I thank the panelists for being flexible in responding to the questions and engaging with each other. I want to make sure that we have time to hear from Dr. Samulikisu Dube, the Executive Director of FP 2030. I think that Dr. Dube is ready to join us here on the screen. So I'll ask all of you to thank our panelists as we hand over to Dr. Dube for some summary remarks. Dr. Dube, so pleased to have you with us here today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Amy, and for putting together this esteemed panel. So thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you, Gifty, for coming through and showing us what UNFPA is doing greatly. Howard Friedman, thank you so much. And then Atenisi, thank you for the work that PI is actually doing in this space. We really appreciate you as a partner, and obviously for MSH leading as a secretariat for the universal health coverage agenda and including civil society as you actually do so. And also, Pooh, thank you so much for giving us examples of from India and highlighting where we should be spending our money. I think in closing, what I would like to say, Amy, is when we are talking about universal health coverage, where the rubber hits the road is not only the supply side of financing, but also the demand side of financing healthcare overall. I think, Howard, as you alluded earlier, you say that this actually should make economic sense. And in economics, it's about, are there returns, obviously? But coming from a rights-based perspective, we know that investing in family planning and investing in universal health coverage actually goes a long way, not only in delivering for women, but also it delivers for the economy. Where we come from as FP 2030, we know that this ought to be rights-based. So the narrative doesn't only need to necessarily be the returns on our investments, they need to also be rights-based. And the work that we have done in the past through consultative partnerships, through engaging with others who are here today, especially organizations like MSH, like Knowledge Success, and even PI, we are grateful for that partnership. I believe that family planning is essential in achieving universal health coverage. In fact, in my mind, I call it effective coverage because in its universality, and somebody asked a question about, we know that family planning may be covered, but what about other methods? Because making sure that the universal health coverage agenda is also effective coverage would help us understand where we are going as a collective. What is it that we want to achieve for women in that universality? So universal health coverage, where we are including family planning and including effective family planning, then becomes effective health coverage. So it's important that this universality is about effectiveness, and it's not just basic, because when it's just basic, we may not even achieve our goals. I believe that UHC provides an element of financial protection, as some of the speakers alluded earlier, and we cannot go forward without UHC cannot advance without including the basic and the effective packages of family planning. And we want to make sure that women and girls all over would be assisted to ensure that they do not actually go into poverty or into financial distress whilst accessing this basic human right. As FP 2030, ladies and gentlemen, we recognize the opportunity that is presented by the UHC agenda as a platform to drive access to family planning and mobilize resources, especially at a national level. Domestic financing is one of our core objectives to mobilize and make sure that it is sustainable. the powerful that FP20 platform that FP 2030 provides, it actually would help us harness some of the strategic levers that would advance the global dialogue on UHC and family planning. And further, we leverage this opportunity at the International Conference on Family Planning. Again, Poonam mentioned these various platforms for engagement, where the theme will be family planning and universal health coverage. I'm grateful for that opportunity, and for us to ground our agenda as FP 2030 on UHC and work in evidence and build synergies with existing initiatives. We propose an approach that would add value, yes, in this conference and beyond. And we have previously held meetings with partners who are currently working on UHC, as I've mentioned. These include PI, Women Deliver, and MSH, who are the leading secretariat, as Amy alluded to earlier. I believe that as we are looking ahead, we've got a gigantic task, ladies and gentlemen, to ensure that we are going to be advancing universal health coverage, not only to speak to the needs that we are seeing for women and girls and fulfilling the unmet need that Gifty and Poonam you mentioned earlier in your remarks. We believe that if we undertake some of the conversations that are mainly country to country, as we heard about the successes from Ghana, it's actually going to cement what we ought to do after conversations like this. I believe that we need to have the connecting conversation series with partners to generate more insights and content for a policy paper that would outline policy priorities and key messages for advocacy and accountability efforts that we hope to be validated at ICFP. You mentioned Adesini around the accountability framework that is important as we ground and implement this work. Today's topic is about theory versus reality. But we believe that FP 2030 also provides an opportunity for accountability on UHC and bridges the gap between global UHC policy and national level action and implementation that is based on country context. Again, there is a high impact practice paper. I actually saw this also on the chart for select countries, which includes an assessment on how UHC is showing up in FP 2030 commitment. Again, the commitment wouldn't be complete if there is no mention of how a country ought to ground its UHC agenda. We seek to leverage these commitments as a platform for accountability, and FP 2030 commitments would be broader, and their broad engagement in the whole SRHR ecosystem. We are open to commitments from civil society actors who are working on SRHR, gender equality, and broadly on global health and other sectors. I joined FP 2030 coming from the private sector, where we were looking at insurance in terms of demand-based financing for healthcare. And I know fully that if we don't cost what we are talking about, if we don't characterize it and know how much it's going to cost us, how is it going to be delivered in the various platforms that Gifty you alluded to, we will not achieve our goals. It is therefore important that we harness expertise that is coming from many fronts, including private sector, in terms of narrating what the ask is on the table, how we are going to finance this ask, and how we are going to deliver it sustainably. I believe, ladies and gentlemen, this agenda, which is a big agenda, cannot be achieved by one individual. It cannot be achieved by the government working alone. It cannot be achieved by just civil society, advocating that we should include everything. It's a thoughtful agenda that is about development. It's an agenda that says we need to make sure that as we advance universal health coverage, family planning is costed. We understand its effectiveness. We understand what impact it will bring. And therefore, we need to include it so that universal health coverage really becomes effective. And with those remarks, thank you so much for attending this forum. Thank you for challenging us to think broader. Thank you for making us and move a little bit away from theory and get reality, which some countries have harnessed, countries like Ghana, countries like Rwanda, who are advancing this agenda at an accelerated speed. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to many such series as we head up to ICFP and beyond. Thank you, Amy, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dubé. And next time we're going to put you in the dialogue, because I'd love to discuss further some of the points you were raising, especially about rights-based, not just return on investment. And I think you really summed up well the focus of all of the panelists on that need for all of us to work together on this gigantic agenda in partnership. As a reminder, you can join us. Thank you all for being here today. You can join us for the next dialogue in August, and we'll have another one following up in October. You're already on the list if you've registered for this one, so stay tuned for more updates. Some of you were asking about the presentations. The recording of the session today will be sent to you following the event. And we're also tweeting, sharing highlights from this on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. We encourage you to help amplify those messages as well. Special thanks to those of you who've stuck with us through the end, and a very special thanks to all of the panelists for sharing their insights and their inspiration today. Poonam talked to us about the dream of achieving universal health coverage and of achieving universal access to family planning and reproductive health. I really look forward to connecting with many of you as we work to make that dream a reality. Look forward to seeing you on future dialogues and to seeing you in Thailand for the International Conference on Family Planning. Thanks again to the organizers for having us here. Lots of folks behind the scenes working to make sure that the technology goes well and that the content was solid. And thanks to our interpreters. I know it's sometimes hard to keep up with us advocates who are so enthusiastic about the family planning and universal health coverage agenda. Thank you all for being here, and have a good rest of your day.